Winemaking's difficult because there are no right answers. It's an infinite number of possibilities and flavors, and it's a craft that will never be mastered. It's a journey. It's not just a product.
Welcome everybody to Wine Stream number 10 by Palmaz Vineyards. I can't believe we've actually made it to episode number 10. I'm Florencia Palmaz, and with me today is my brother and sister-in-law, Christian and Jessica. Hi guys.
How's it going?
Hi.
How are you? I'm glad we at least got to see one countdown today.
I know. Saturday. We got to hope for Saturday.
all day watching. So yeah, that was a little anticlimactic. But
with 16 minutes to spare. Yeah. Oh, well, we are here and we've got some fabulous wines to share with everybody. Once again, it's going to be a great show. We're looking forward to my dad's coming on to talk about chemistry of wine and the gravity and a little bit of the logic behind why we designed the winery we did. There is nothing more luxurious in my mind than being able to drink beautiful wines and hear from geniuses, their areas of specialty and their thoughts. So hope you join us. Stick around. Dad will be joining us soon. In the meantime, I see we've got a cool new setup over there. Chris, why don't you talk about where you are today?
Yeah, so this is pretty exciting. So we are calling in from the gallery. So the gallery is where most of our customer experiences occur. We have these 4 what we call sensory neutral tasting rooms that have their own HEPA filtration system. They were actually designed to make sure that the air was as aromatically neutral as possible. There was a high rate of change. And you know, it's interesting how we find
Who
ourselves.
Who would have thought that all of your sensory neutral was actually going to benefit for a pandemic, right?
Exactly. So what we did is, since we're getting so many requests to do virtual tastings for our customers, and so that they can bring their guests into their home via our system, we have installed life-size teleconferencing systems in each of our gallery rooms. And so we're calling in from the Gallery 2 today, and we're really excited about this. It's going to be pretty fun.
Yeah. So the idea is that now we can actually arrange for tasting experiences in your home with you and your friends. We've actually found this unexpected benefit to this rapid need to go virtual was that a lot of families have actually been finding this to be a fun way to connect with people all across the country. Maybe you would not have otherwise traveled and gathered. We can actually ship wine to all of your homes, set up for a fun virtual tasting, hosted by one of the ambassadors. And the great thing is you can pretty much taste anything in our portfolio. We'll ship it to you, and we are actually partnering also with some fine cheese and gourmet products and charcuteries, so we can even arrange for you to have a cool tasting experience as well. We'll get online with you and make it fun and lively, and everyone can interact and have a glass together virtually. We think this is something that's going to be a cool feature to everyone's life, whether they're sheltered in place or not. This is just one of those benefits to these new times.
Yeah, we're really excited, and not only just to be able to do virtual tastings, but a lot of times our customers have a family member or friend that couldn't make it on their Napa trip, and we're excited to now be able to let you connect with your friends at home while you're here, and it's we'll post some photos about.
Super snub them, like, no, look where we are.
No, of course, we're going to send them all the wines and make sure they're feeling included. But and it's not just virtual tastings, right? We have the paella event. Well, tell us a little bit about what do you have planned for that?
Oh my gosh. So of course the Napa County is not allowing us to have any events. So unfortunately Jessica and I got together and said, okay, what can we do for all of our fabulous club members who are not able to join us for the paella party? Chris, do you have some images of that so we can talk about what we normally do? So one of the big benefits to our Process Club is our 3 big events a year. The funnest one for me is the paella. We've got a pan that is literally as tall as I am round. And we make these big monster paellas, and we celebrate the release of the Chardonnay as well as drink some fabulous older Cabernets. And it's a super fun party. Unfortunately, it's also scheduled for June 12th and was not able to have parties anymore. So in lieu of that, we are bringing it to your home. We've actually partnered with the same company that manufactures my big pan. They make a smaller version. I think it's a 15-inch pan. Is that right, Jess? Yeah, so we've actually got them to make 15-inch mini-sized pans that feed a family of 4 to 6, and we'll ship to you the bottle of Chardonnay, a bottle of Brasas, the pan, the rice, and the few other key ingredients that I think sort of make my paella special, not to be cocky. It's actually my mother's recipe. I'm using Mom's recipe. So we'll ship you all the goodies. All you have to do is buy the seafood, and join us online. I will be making a video showing everyone all of my tips and tricks on how to make the paella perfect. And then on the 20th, to celebrate and cheers with us, come online, show off your paellas on a live stream that we'll have just for members who have purchased the kit. And then we've actually got Django, who was on the wine stream last week, will be joining us, and he'll be giving us a private concert, full set, so that in the background, while you're enjoying your wine and your paella with your friends or your family, you can enjoy a fun private show with Django Walker and the Walker family. So it's going to be great. Amazingly enough, we literally just dropped the email, 2 hours ago? Already more people are attending the virtual paella than we're planning on coming to the party here. So total success.
That is one benefit of going virtual, that we can host a few more faces. So that would be really exciting.
That's right.
Absolutely. And really, look, I always like to make sure that we are providing a value and a memorable experience to our club members. Honestly, $340 for that whole kit really is a pretty spectacular dinner, and it's a good value for anyone who wants to put together a small dinner party and reconnect with their friends and family and have some fun. So we're looking forward to it. It's going to be June 20th, and if you're interested in joining us, give us a call. Your ambassadors on the phone can help you make the arrangements, and we will send you out a kit here shortly. So yeah, looking forward to it. It's going to be a ton of fun. And then we've got some fabulous wines today to taste through. Yes?
We've really excited about this lineup.
We've decided, since we have the luxury of having Dad come on, which is really such a pleasure when Dad agrees to come on with us and talk to us about sort of the chemistry and the real science behind wine. That is something that Dad really dove into and understands intimately well. Between his science background in medicine and then, of course, studying up on wine, he's got a really interesting perspective and a wonderful thing to share with everybody. So in honor of Dad coming on and to talk about the chemistry of wine and aging of wine and gravity of wine, we said, well, let's taste through some of the portfolio in the library. So Jess went into the cellar and has pulled out a really sweet little library vertical for everybody. We've got in front of us today an offering to be able to purchase 2013, 14, and 15 straight up vertical of 3 extraordinary vintages. Couldn't be really a tighter cluster of really kind of decades historic weather patterns and cool things that happened here in the Napa Valley. So
what's also cool is that for the first time ever, we have, this was the first year that we put together magnums in box, right?
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Show off that little sexy, we nicknamed them the baller box.
And honestly, the photos don't do it justice. You have to see it. It is massive. It's dwarfing me, and I'm going to try and pull one out without breaking something. Here we go.
Careful.
So they are magnums. You can tell by the size compared to the 750s on the table. But so what we've done is Kyle and Gil put together How many, do we have a limit on these?
Probably.
Okay, well, we'll let you know if you hit the limit.
But I don't.
But I know we just started. I think 13 was the first year we started doing, holding back in our library program magnums for this purpose. And so we finally get to share them in this 3-pack wood boxers.
Yeah. Kyle, Jenny, I know you guys are watching. If you guys happen to know what that limit is, text me and we'll share it with everybody while we're on the show. We don't want to misrepresent anyone. I know that last week we made that kind of off the cuff comment about the 3 liters and immediately we sold every single one. So, I've now gotten really sensitive about what we say on this show. It happens really fast.
So we do have 1.5 liters that you can buy individually, and here's the pricing for that. And then, of course, the special wood boxes, which, of course, we have the 6-pack vertical with 2 of each vintage, and then a 3-pack vertical, which, of course, is the 1.5 liters. Yeah, the magnums. So pretty fun.
Yeah, super fun. And Chris has agreed to customize each one of the 3-pack wood boxes for anyone who wishes to buy these. These are really exceptional collector pieces for your cellar. He's agreed to go ahead and do custom etched brass tags for anyone who does buy those. Sorry, brother, you're going to be spending some time in your garage etching tags.
I don't know if anybody realizes this, but I have made, personally, have etched every single brass tag in the history of the company.
Yes.
It's something I could have easily given away, but for something about working with that beautiful etcher, it's like my Sunday ritual, and I really enjoy doing it. And so I'm more than, it's one of those things that I think will hopefully last forever. And so Gaston and I like to do that on Sunday, and that's always been fun. Here's a picture of what those brass tags look like, and we're happy to etch it with anything you want. If you're sending it out as a gift, we're happy to etch a name or a date, or we've gotten some pretty cool requests on what to put on a brass tag, so happy to do it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So he actually has this etcher in his garage next to a cool TV, and he and his son go back there on Sundays and they play and they etch. They etch tags and watch TV shows. So we know what you're doing this Sunday, dear brother.
Yes, happy to do it.
So before we dive into these gorgeous wines, would hate to lose this opportunity without Dad. He'd be furious. So let's bring him on. I understand he's calling from your office, right? So we're like slowly adding life sizes into all of our offices. We can have like the whole Brady Bunch family set up.
Thank you, Life Size. You've been a great partner. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll let's see if we can get Dad on. Go.
Hate to lose this opportunity without Dad. He'd be furious.
Oh,
so
hey, Dad. How's it going?
Hello. Your office, right? So we're like slowly adding
Can
life
you,
sizes. So we can
I think
like
you're watching the stream.
Yeah.
That's adding to our viewership numbers. Thanks, Dad. We really need every one of those we can get. So you're watching the stream. Oh,
yeah. Let me turn this off, because otherwise, everything 30 seconds later, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, you'll actually want to
mute your phone.
Stop the stream.
Yeah. Let me turn this telephone off, because well, at any rate, some it'll happen.
Awesome.
Well, welcome. We're excited to have you, and really looking forward to hearing your perspective on. Do you want me to just come over there and help you? You got it.
No, that's fine. I got it.
It's definitely a live show.
I don't have to go
no
recording on my
this.
cell phone.
Okay.
Dad, cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers. All right, cheers. All right.
Loving technology every day here.
So Dad, we are drinking through the 13, 14, and 15, and I know, I've always loved your perspective on the wines and how they're aging, and your take on the sort of the evolution of the vineyards. What do you think of 13? How do you feel like it's tasting these days?
Definitely, there is an evolution. They're different and actually pretty individual. So it's a pleasure to drink all three of them here. Happy hour time, so it's a good opportunity while I listen to everything that you were saying before.
Excellent. Yeah, I was the same. When I opened up the 13 for the first time, it's been a few weeks that I've had a 13, and I'm just amazed. I feel like it's turning a corner, like new aromas are coming forward in this week that weren't there for me, at least last week. You know, there's a delicate, almost sandalwood characteristic that just came forward that I didn't smell last week, and I've always loved your kind of perspective on the amplification of wine. Can you share with our listeners a little bit your understanding of that?
Wine is a live liquid, and so there is things going on in a bottle of wine. It's not just a static product that it won't change after you've last finished bottling, and there's some chemical explanation for it. I always like to find out why things are what they are. So because I put this in my body, I want to know what is in it. But there is such a thing, as you said, the wines get amplified, get more complex. They change chemically with time, and there's a perfect explanation for it. Wines have their own oxygen generator. So you can actually seal a bottle completely and keep it 100 years and it won't be the same. If you put some inert fluid in there, such as water and alcohol, for example, I mean, it will be the same after 100 years. It will not change. But wine will change, even if it's perfectly sealed.
That's so cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what is the chemical? I mean, we don't want to dive too deep into it, but what is the basic chemical mechanism that's causing wine to effectively evolve?
Yeah, well, essentially is a generator of oxygen, which is the phenols, and then there is an enzyme which actually converts those phenols, into different species, which are all oxygen generators. They all give off oxygen, and that oxygen is what causes oxidation. Some chemistries then go down the oxidation pathway and change. For example, the most simple of them is actually, so that is, you see that the polyphenol oxidase is an enzyme that modifies phenol into phenolate and ultimately into quinone, and you see each one of them have an oxygen that is very readily available for a chemical oxidation.
Right.
So if you, take the example of alcohol, for example, alcohol will go into aldehyde and then further on into, lactic acid, but in between it will form other different compounds, and all of that just shows how starting out with a simple molecule, ethyl alcohol, you end up with essentially 6 compounds, which at one given time will actually have multiplied the complexity of just alcohol in water by a mixture of 6 different chemicals. So that is the basis, because there's so many different chemistries in wine that do the same or even more complex evolutions, that it will explain why wine gets complex with time.
So that same effect, that multiplication effect that occurs as the wine is essentially heading its way to acetyl alcohol, that effect is what causes the wine to peak. So tell us a little bit about, if that is true, what do you think is really the definitive chemical explanation for why wines hit their peak, and when would that likely happen?
Right, so going back to the original example of the alcohol, all right, so the alcohol eventually will turn into acetic acid. So wine eventually will turn into vinegar, isn't it? With time. But it's a function of time. So it would be one point in time where you will have the maximum number of compounds, which would be one way between the beginning and the end of that evolution. So Of course, that evolution depends on the wine itself, on the temperature, and many conditions that are individual of each wine. But I would say that probably the multiplication effect goes to a certain point, which is definable probably as the peak of the wine. At that point, the wine will be the most complex. And then from then on, it will keep on going into a simplification until it all becomes essentially something simple and probably undrinkable. Yeah. So yeah, wines do have an optimum time to drink, but that doesn't mean that you have to wait, all the potential life of any wine to be able to drink it. But it tells you that wines probably do improve with time. That is the most important thing we need to know.
One of my favorite sayings that I've always loved actually came from Sean Lutwick, who's our director of national sales. He says, "I'd rather drink a wine 5 years too early than 5 minutes too late." Right?
Yeah, right.
Better to catch it on the heading up than on the heading down.
Excellent.
But at the same time, we've never even seen we have not seen an arc like that in any of our vintages yet. So, thanks to the approach you took, we have yet to see the degradation of any of our vintages. They continue to be experiencing, all 20 vintages of ours are continuing to have that amplification so far, right? We're looking forward to trying to test that outer boundary.
Probably that peak effect, it would probably, in a well-made wine, probably you're talking about dozens of years. Perhaps in other beverages even more, but for a wine, you might expect that the wines will be at their peak, say, if it is done in excellent conditions and kept well from there on, that it will be at its peak, say, a few years to several years. All right. All that said, the wine technology has evolved, and now we make wines that they are not that different from the time of 1 year after bottling from what they be at their peak. So they improve, but not that much. You see, in the past, the wines were made in such a way that you really had to wait. They were pretty much unpleasant or undrinkable, shortly after being bottled, and you had to wait. Well, that is no longer true, and now wines are made pretty drinkable. And statistics tell you that, 90% of the wine is consumed within 1 hour of being sold?
Yes, absolutely. As much as
many people have the patience to wait. Yeah, right.
As hard as we work to make it a collector's item, the reality is most of it's just getting popped as soon as they're receiving it. But it's also part of, and it's that reality that it really guided us to not only think about the collectability of it and the historic side of winemaking, but also to be really sensitive to the fact that, yes, we have to deliver something that's both delicious now and delicious later. And that refinement is where your design and the technology really took us to achieve something that was pretty unprecedented in the industry before that.
Let's get into that. So, obviously wine is a combination of lots of unique structures and chemical structures. Particularly one really drove the industry to think about wine handling from a gentle perspective. So tell us a little bit about tannins and what is their role in wine?
Well, like you said, many chemistries, but if you want to single out one that is really unique in wine, is they called polyphenols, and of those, the tannins is the one that gives the red wine such a unique characteristic, which is that robust taste, that endurance in your mouth, that multi-layering and so forth. So yeah, tannins are an important part of red wines. They also, the ones that give the unique red color and ruby color and bluish tones and intense reds are also, polyphenols, the anthocyanins. And then the miracle molecules, all the ones that have been attributed all these, life prolonging characteristics and effects in health, which are the flavonoids. But we are not going to talk about that. Let's leave that aside. That is medicine. So we drink wine because we like it and not for nothing else. Yeah.
So tell us about this understanding that these catechins, right, which are the kind of the building blocks of the tannin. So it was discovered that they polymerize. So the science had really started to become clearer in the early 90s that these longer polymers change their effect on the palate. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, okay. So the catechin is one of the common tannins in wine, and they produce polymers which are not very stable. They are actually easily disrupted by agitation or a strong treatment. They form polymers that they are not too long. So typically, a polymer 3 to 10 is a characteristic in wine, polycatechin. And the interesting thing is, just as it was known in the tanning industry, the longer the tannin, the greater the ability to bind proteins. So as you can imagine then, if you have a polymer of catechin, a large concentration of long chain polycatechins in wine, that wine will tend to be probably perceived as having a strong, long-lasting taste in your mouth because of the binding ability.
Long finish.
Right? Oh, that's right. Of those molecules to bind the mucosa, and so they essentially cling to your mucosa, to your taste buds, and therefore give you the persistence effect.
So what kind of environment does the wine need to be in order to best form these long polymers?
Well, for one thing, quiet. We haven't found a way to make this polymerization occur faster by any means. So it's just time and quiet and relatively low temperatures and probably darkness. All those things are important for this polymerization to occur. And, much of what we know is essentially from history. I mean, we know that an old, wonderful wine ought to be treated carefully. We decant them, we treat them like a baby. You don't put it in your trunk of your car and drive it for 8 days around before you drink it. Of course not. You put it in your cellar at 60 degrees and you treat it very nicely, isn't it? Yes. Particularly if it is a good wine. Well, I mean, all that has some reasoning behind it in that you don't want to disturb those fragile polymers, all right, so that you can take maximum advantage of them.
Yeah. So take us back a little bit. You and Mom arrived to Napa, or you started coming to Napa in the late 70s. You of course, you went to Texas because that's where your medical career took you to UT Health Science Center. But when you came back in the 90s, it was 1996, 97. You basically had a blank slate to start with. Take us a little bit through, how did you get from, I'd love to get into wine, to building an 18-story structure underground?
Well, just like you said, the kind of the white canvas to get into a big project is right. We had at that time the resources to do a significant project, so started getting informed, getting to know people that knew the business. And if we were going to do a new winery, which the beautiful property that Mom found was an ideal place to do something like it. And so it wasn't in a lot of people's minds that a vertical winery was an interesting project. Everybody told me you're getting into a complicated, difficult project. We probably have a lot of problems with regulation insofar being able to execute something like that. It probably will not be cheap. It'll be very expensive and very complex. and it has a lot of unknowns because essentially, a full gravity wine, meaning that the whole process is done under gravity, completely underground, is not being done before. So that challenge was enough for me to take it.
Well, we know you're no stranger to challenges, but tell us a little bit. So there was this understanding that being gentle during winemaking had its benefits, and there were already many wineries in the valley around the world who were exploring this idea of building a multi-story structure, usually 2 stories, with some kind of elevator. How did that idea of gentle handling evolve into the need to have a 22-story structure that effectively, how did you guys get to that point?
Well, somebody once counted all the moves that wine needs to have during its processing, and they came up with something between 55 and 60. And all of those moves, most of them traditionally were done with pumps. In other words, they were essentially moving wine from point A to point B by using some sort of a mechanical effect, like a pump. And so the idea of using gravity is old, is probably from biblical times. I've seen very old wineries in France where actually they used to use mules or horses to pull tanks up above to 20-some feet to be able to generate the pressure to transfer wine or to bottle and so forth. But then it is obvious that the motivation would be to use gravity in all the movements of wine, and for that, then you get into not just moving around and and doing things like transferring wines and blending and so forth, but rather you get into things like filtration, and that is what requires a serious amount of mechanical, application of energy.
Yeah, actually, you just pointed out something, Dan, that I think is one of the most interesting little details of our winemaking process: filtration. Before we dive into how we tackled it, can you explain to the viewers why it's so essential in Cabernet, particularly
why we filtrate wines?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, essentially, we used very fine pour in the order of 1 micron filters. They're typically stacked filters, and to be able to drive the wine through it, you need very high pressure. And the objective is to get rid of all the dead yeast and flocculent particles and crystals and other undesirable things in wine. You want the wine to be stable in the bottle from then on. You just want wine. You don't want dead yeast or live yeast before bottling. So, filtration is almost like a no option. It ought to be done if you want a product that you want to keep in a bottle for 10 years or something like that.
Right. Absolutely.
Or longer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you were on that discussion of filtration. So there was obviously this unwillingness to compromise the gravity story, because conceivably almost every other part of the winemaking process could have been accomplished by some sort of tank and an elevator. So,
right.
So when you were there with the engineers and you guys decided that you would not compromise on the filtration, what was that like? How did architecturally did you get from a building that was going to be tall enough, and how did you guys conceive to layer it and end up with the design that you ultimately did?
Well, just to transfer wine around from tanks to barrels and back, that requires maybe the equivalent of a 2-3 story building. But to filter using gravity, now you're talking about like a skyscraper. Now you're talking about a tall building. greater than 12 stories. You're talking about something really tall. And that complicates the project enormously. And it did in our case, because it became from a simple thing into something really complex.
And just to share with our viewers a little bit, the distances between these layers, for example, the distance from the purple level to the dome, or the yellow, where the green and yellow level, it's 133 feet. And so that distance that my father's talking about is what gives us about 57 PSI. Well, all of that had to be calculated so that from the location where the blend was occurring there in the yellow level to where the bottling system is down in the purple level, all of that had to be thought through. And so I can only imagine that structurally, when the designs were initially, tell us a little bit about what, you were working with John Lael, Underground Associates at Graham Wozencroft, and what was the initial designs look like for a tall structure?
Well, the initial design was actually, just like you said, an underground building, which meant essentially a prism, underground. And that is impossible to place underground with a cross-section of 55 feet or something like that. So obviously, it just couldn't be done. So we had the motivation, but the concept started evolving and ended up in this. Perhaps you have a 3D picture there when this started looking more like an International Space Station underground than it did essentially an 18-story building.
Sure.
Because there are other things. You've got lateral pressures, and you got a whole bunch of different factors that enter into the physical engineering or something like this, and the project evolved, unfortunately, to the complex side, but always with the same motivation to get that vertical distance to generate the gravity flow.
Dad, we've always talked about how critical it is to have both gravity flow wines, but really gravity finished wines. That's one of the sort of buzzwords that we use here all the time. Can you speak to why that is chemically so important?
Well, I always put the example, just, grab a wine, try to make the experiment of putting a good wine in a blender and put it there for just 1 minute in the blender and then taste it. After compare with the one that has not been subject. And then you realize what mechanical agitation does to a wine. It pretty much destroys a lot of the characteristics. And,
we recommend, by the way, that everyone do this without our wine. Go grab someone else's wine and throw it in a blender.
It's not a good idea. Yeah, right. So, the physics behind it is that in every form of pumping, there is the creation of low and high pressures. So behind every blade, every part of a pump, there is essentially a side of low pressure and a side of high pressure. In the side of low pressure, you generate essentially a cavitation, and on the side of high pressure, you involve increase in partial pressure of the gas. So essentially, you change that status of the gas in relationship to the fluid. And then obviously that creates microbubbles and shear effects and all kinds of things that are negative to the wine. So, you want to move the wine, by more gentle means than using any kind of pump. There's no pump that doesn't have a negative effect on wine.
Inside those microbubbles that you're talking about are the aromas and some of the sensory, right? Is some of the things, the complexity that you lost.
That is some of the things we understand, and there's many that we don't understand. Like you said, all the aromatics are so complex. They are so fragile, also chemically speaking. Like pyrazines and all all the aromas that. They're all very fragile compounds. They're easily disrupted. They are easily destroyed by all kinds of, changes in partial pressure and agitation and so forth. You don't want to do it. It's a bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So after having worked so hard for 2 years and making a beautiful wine, then basically blowing off through forced pumping a whole layer of the complexity is a travesty, right?
Right. I mean, an idea of how unstable these compounds are is the fact that you just cork the wine, gently pour it into a glass, shake it, and they come off, and you perceive them right there. Then you get your floral aromas and your fruity aromas and all the other things that wine gives off so easily. So, but you want to have them available in your glass, not being wasted into some sort of machine equipment,
Yeah, absolutely. And hence the 18 stories, right? Or 22 stories. There's always debate as to how high a story is.
Well, to clarify, the 18 stories is the section underground, right? We don't typically count the part of the shaft that sticks out of the ground, so that's why we round it down to 18. But yeah.
Yeah. So let's dive back into the wines. We got caught up in talking about some of the cool stuff. Dad, what do you think of 14?
I mean, it's great. I like 13 a little bit better because but 14 is wonderful. It's getting there. I mean, it has a lot of character. It's a more punchy wine. And,
so we know you well enough. You like 13 for a totally different reason than what's in the glass.
I'm not a wine critic, I'm not very objective about wines and things like that. I'm more like a numbers guy. Yeah.
Well, so for everyone at home, 13 is our family's lucky number. It is so many things incredible in our lives have happened on the 13th, and so many incredible things have the number 13 in our family, namely my father's.
We are not superstitious, by the way. Yeah.
No, not at all. So I would say that for this entire family's history, anything 13 is super special. So yes, we will put that bias aside. Yeah. It's really pretty.
Yeah.
And
before it goes off my mind, let me bring another interesting point, because I wanted to say, when you brought up the tannins as being the wonderful molecules in wine, it is something that has not been proven, but is a likely mechanism, because so many things in biology happen like that. Many molecules actually bind to surfaces through a carrier. So tannins, I like to think them of carriers, since they have such a strong binding ability to a surface, particularly mucosas, okay, because they make actually, very long-term chemical lodging to proteins, all right? They could probably be actually the carriers of hydrosoluble compounds, like the very expensive sugars that we have in the barrels. So the barrels, the sort of very expensive barrels that we have, that we age our wines, give off these wonderful complex sugars, arabinose, rhamnose, and others. And these complex sugars are hydrosoluble.
Which are basically forms of, can you explain what you mean by complex sugars? They're basically forms of carbohydrates, right?
It's a large size, high molecular weight carbohydrate. They're hydrosoluble, all right? Just like a simple glucose, these things, are mostly hydrosoluble. Anything that is hydrosoluble doesn't bind to mucosas very well, but everything that is, if you can bring them back as with a carrier, just as a polytannin, okay, then it's possible that the residence time at the taste buds could actually be longer, and therefore you will be able to have a longer perception of these complex sugars in your mouth because of this phenomenon.
It is a fantastic theory. I mean, it really is a fantastic theory, because it really then makes the wine sort of the perfect carrier of these complex. Otherwise, you're saying that these would be characteristics not
Fleeting.
yeah, they'd be fleeting, more fleeting than if the
Well, I mean,
I also
think of
thought
it,
is
I mean-
that the ability to perceive the oak or those caramel flavors would not be able to be appreciated if you didn't have a good tannin concentration in the wine. Right?
Well,
They
I mean,
would
they
just
do
sit
things
like that.
right. Tannins by themselves, they would probably give off only astringency. And probably as they form, long, stable compounds in your mucosa, well, that's why you're blue tongue after you drink a lot of red wine, all right? They probably just have a build-up of astringency and you end up, having actually a dry mouthfeel, all right? So I would like to think of them as a way to act as a carrier to have those wonderful and very expensive, complex carbohydrates that the barrels give off, and then, give you that symphony of flavor that the red wines have.
So then, is that a reason why it is another reason why it's better to have longer chain polymers than shorter chain polymers?
Well, I mean, it's well known. The longer the polymer chain, the better the tanning ability. They just
Right.
have more reaction sites to grab onto the mucosal binding points. So a longer molecule is more effective, and but the complex sugars probably don't have a very effective way to bind to your mucosa if it wasn't because of some sort of a carrier. So this is unproven, and it's a good theory, and who knows, it may never, may remain as a theory, but it's actually a good one, isn't it?
It's a
very
little
good.
it's a little happy hour wine theory. Why not?
Yeah, right.
So there's another on that note. I know we talk about hydrosolubles and the different carriers and fat. There's a great old saying that I'd love for you to speak to, which is you sell wine with cheese. Right? The French said you judge wine with water, but you sell wine with cheese. Can you speak a little bit to maybe, does that have anything to do with this?
Yeah, that is an interesting observation. Wine is not, red wine is not a sipping beverage. I mean, you would like to always munch something with it. And perhaps, these fatty bites that you can have with wine help in the wine perception. And much of that because of, I really don't know, but probably because it produces a fat layer on the mucosa that helps the binding of these liposolubles. But I just don't know. I practice it every day.
I was going to say, we are testing your theory.
And Dad, with that, we have some beautiful cheeses for you to be able to, keep your mucosa clean. So. I've got two excellent questions that have come through while you were. I love the level of engagement. Everyone wants to ask Dad questions. Two of them are pretty timely to what we're talking about right now. I'd love to cut in for them. One of them is from Jonathan, who is asking, have you used any molecular diagnostic techniques like PCR at the winery to determine the microbial profile that some might believe may influence the terroir? I don't know if you want to touch this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, PCR genomic analysis go hand in hand. No, we don't have those technologies available here, and we are really not. We always send those things out. I mean, Chris probably can tell more of that.
So a PCR machine, like for example, the Scorpion. So we do use the Scorpion. The Scorpion uses some, basically PCR or RNA-like detector to detect, but we use it for the presence of detecting bacteria in the wine. In other words, we're looking for flaws in the wine itself, but we've never used it.
You're looking for species,
like
on yeast,
presence of or presence also of the kinds of things that would produce flaws. In other words, we're looking for contaminants at the barrel level to make sure that the wine in the barrel is safe to blend with. And it's checked at every time we do a racking, which is pretty common in high-end wineries. But I don't know, very likely maybe there was a study done at a university level where techniques like that are used to study what's coming in from the vineyard. In terms of but the terroir is such a broad word. I'm not sure you could capture it totally with PCR alone, right? It's such a broad. There's
It'd be
more
a pretty
than
big
just
universe.
organics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be a pretty big universe to test for, honestly. And we have not attempted to do that on any kind of microflora outside, right?
I am almost sure that there are projects like that in Davis because they are always interested in those things, and I am sure that they have equipment to do it, and that a PCR would be a good way to analyze microbial flora and root systems and so forth.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a fascinating study, and we always look forward to seeing them from the academics. We're here operationally, it would be a pretty big endeavor. The second question that we have is from a gentleman named John Jr. He's been waiting 20 years to hear the answer from someone on this one. That's interesting. He said, a very good friend of his believes that excellent wines go to sleep, that they're good for about 10 years, then they're not so good, and if you wait another 5, they wake up and become better than ever. Dad, can you, if they were better at 10 years and then at 15, is there any science behind this? Do you want to tackle that?
It sounds like a fairy story. That's great. Maybe there's a genie in that wine that woke up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think more like a chemist in that respect. I think it's just time, time and gradients and, all those things that drive a reaction in certain direction. I think these things are pretty linear, but who knows? I mean, I love to believe something like that.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of chemistry that might explain that. I mean, you talked about the multiplication effect where, effectively A turns to B turns to C turns to D, but there's always a little bit of A, B, C around until there's a point where it's all D, right? And so maybe there's moments in which there are concentrations of certain things that create desirable effects.
Good. It's always good to think.
I don't know. Again, just a theory.
That drive chemistry to a good story. I mean, that's right. So as a medium gets more complex with more species, I mean, it will have a peak, and that peak is probably the time where you have essentially the maximum amount of possible intermediate compounds. But as the reaction moves forward, then, like you said, A, B, C's will all turn into D's, and then the wine will get more simple because it'll be all D's, isn't it? So that is, in that respect, yes, probably you have a peak and then a decline. Yeah.
Right. I do have to confess, though, qualitatively, there's a part to John's comment that I've experienced in a much more minor way. I wouldn't say that it's a going to sleep effect, but I have seen, tasting the same vintage year over year, kind of like 13 is today, or even 14 is just suddenly so ripe. It's just got a beautiful mid palate that it didn't necessarily have upon release. It's very subjective, right, to say it got better or worse. It's that evolution that it's in. It's teasing my preferences, right? Who knows if it's more complex or less complex?
You're talking about a dish that has a lot of ingredients. So what is the right proportion of the ingredients that will give you the perfect taste? Maybe it's not necessarily the peak in complexity, but rather at some point, magical point in the evolution that give you the perfect combination.
Yeah, it hit something that strikes you personally. That, regardless of its complexity.
There is
level,
obviously an element of subjectiveness here. Now, not to show a parallel, because they're not really the same, but there's another part of wine that does show this sort of sleepiness and waking up, and here's a great, or kind of from Dad's chemistry talk that you gave some time ago, but this talks a little bit about, bottle shock and what is the chemical explanation for why bottle shock occurs. You want to talk a little bit about this?
Let me see. It's been a while.
I know, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Obviously, the first molecule we have on the left side of the equation is ethyl alcohol plus oxygen, which is oxidation, will give you ethyl aldehyde. Ethyl aldehyde is the mean bugger that gives you the hangover. And obviously, here we see ethylaldehyde being combined with sulfite, all right, and then give you a compound. I remember now that this compound, sulfite aldehyde, will actually have a numbing effect, on essentially a blanking effect. It's an anti-flavor, if you will. And so they say that when you have this, big capture of aldehyde by sulfites in the wine, which are available, widely available in wine, then that you will have this numbing effect in where the wine essentially tastes less than it should. All right, what is called the bottle shock. All right. So one way to reverse that is essentially to undo that. All right. So we are not going to get into the methods we have, but there are ways to remove that, that compound so that the numbing or blanking effect doesn't occur.
Well, and of course, it's also a self-healing prophecy, right? The bottle shock essentially solves itself because,
yes.
It's just time. Time is the best cure.
Yeah. What was that movie? There was a movie that was done here in the Valley about bottle shock.
Bottle shock.
There you go. All right. You have the name bottle shock. Right. They not only had that flavor blanking effect, but also gave white wine a pink color or something. Remember that he had an off color?
He had a mystery oxidation event that nearly destroyed everything.
And in the middle of a crisis, the thing went away, isn't it? After he vented off all the sulfite, because the sulfite will evolve into SO2 and that gas is off, and then the shock disappeared.
There was a little bit of Hollywood interpretation
there were some Hollywood assumptions there in that one, if I remember correctly. But it did save that winery. In fact, I don't know, anecdotally, I heard that Chateau Montelena was up for sale prior to that movie's production, and then, of course, was able to stay in the family's hands after the movie. So, bottle shock saved Montelena in more than one time.
Right.
Well, this is fantastic. I love tasting through these. We always have such an infinite number of flavors. It's impossible to be able to parse out where they came from and how they came about. We love to play with both, the reasoning behind Mother Nature attributing a certain profile to a wine, and then, of course, what we can do in the winery to enhance a profile of a wine or basically not destroy a profile of a wine. Tasting through these three vintages, 14 is tasting so ripe and so luscious. And if I remember correctly, Chris, this was the ripest of the 3 years. It was the warmest of the 3 years. And you can totally taste it in that palate. It's tasting beautiful right now. It's really, it's come into its own in really a beautiful way. And then additionally, 15 now, who is essentially our baby on the table, and that 5 years is really coming into its own as well. We've been tasting this wine quite a bit on winemaker dinners throughout the country, and really know this wine. This is the one that we all drink the most often among ourselves, and really at 5 years, it seems like a little bit to John Jr.'s comment. At 5 years, this one just came into its own and it's relaxed and settled in. There's definitely no bottle shock in any of these. The 2016 that we just started selling does have, we've definitely seen it through the release. It had some shock in the first, 6 to 8 months. It's why we don't start selling it to the public until nearly 18 months after bottling, so that we can completely resolve shock prior to the customers. Dad, is there any truth to the antidote from to collectors that when they receive their bottles via FedEx, that they also go through a mini shock of transport and they should not be opened until a few days after they've been received?
Well, again, it goes back to that equation you showed me there. Yeah, it's oxygenation of alcohol converting into aldehyde. So yeah, aldehyde is unstable in wine. It will combine with the sulfite and give you that hyposulfite compound, all right? And but then it's just a matter of, you can probably decant it and wait a little bit and it will gas off. So I think that's it. The other thing is the avoid agitation. That's the other thing. And avoid heating. If you heat it up, you will have all this happening faster. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's something that we've always talked about in doing all these virtual tastings that we're going to start here pretty soon. One of the conversations is we want to make sure to get the bottles in people's hands for a few days so they relax before they open them and have a tasting experience in their home. Because here at the winery, of course, the wines are gently carried up from the cellar up to the tasting room. They're never agitated. They taste incredible here.
Let's talk for a second if we have the time. Do we have time just for another little thing?
All the time,
all
yes.
Right. The issue about gassing off. In other words, when we do this to, essentially to make things go up. There is not just hyposulfite or an SO2 that we're trying to blow off. I mean, there is a whole bunch of other volatiles in there. Some of them are desirable, others are undesirable for wine perception. But it's part of the thing. This is not essentially like a fancy thing you do in a bar, go like this. You look so sophisticated, shaking your red wine in a big goblet like this. But you're doing that. You're gassing off all those compounds. Some of them are not pleasant, and then that's why you check. And you say, now I can smell something different than I did a minute ago after just doing this. And you try to sound smart and you carry your conversation and you're actually improving your drink.
Do you think there's any truth to the myth that we always have to use leaded crystal for this sophisticated little swirl?
To do what? I'm sorry, Dee?
Well, I've always heard stories that you really should use hand-blown leaded crystal for wine goblets so that you can fully appreciate the aromas. Do you think that there's any truth to that story chemically?
Well, I don't know. I think it's a lot up here, right? This thing of drinking wine in the old-fashioned cut glass thing, it doesn't taste the same to me. I like the thin, hand-blown crystal. And when I see these old British movies and they are drinking very old French wines there in this little little glasses, I can't imagine they're enjoying it the same way we enjoy our wines today. I think the shape of the glass, I don't think the fact that it's leaded or non-leaded makes any difference really because it's neutral, but I think it's all in the shape. It's all in the shape and the way that we can spread.
The story I heard from George Riedel, who used to have, I don't even know if he still does this, he used to give these fabulous wine dinners around the country where you could hear from George Riedel himself about why the glasses are shaped a certain way, was that large glasses with big goblet sizes were important so you could scrape the wine up against the walls, right, and volatilize to smell it.
Well, okay, let's go back to the concept. What is an aroma, all right? An aroma is a mixture of smell and taste, all right? So obviously, whatever you can volatilize by doing this, at the same time you drink, then you express that aroma, which is, so that when you can taste, you have your nose full with that wonderful vapor that comes off the wine. So that, to me, gives you a more full appreciation for the wine that you could out of a little thing like this. That is, like a little little cup,
Absolutely.
There's obviously a lot of volatiles, in wine. So these things want to turn into things we can smell. So we definitely excite that when we shake it up a little bit.
Completely. Well, I
It
have
would
to
be
confess,
interesting
we're
to know
having
that.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I said, well, maybe let me talk too much, but it'll be interesting to know, how the pathways get into a different combination, because obviously we have, a taste pathway, and then we have an olfactory pathway, but how the two blend together give you a new experience, the aroma experience. And perhaps that excites a different part of the brain that normally will not be excited by having one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the
Absolutely. Add on to that a good social memory, some friends, and some good conversation, and you just have a brain explosion, right? It's a whole party.
I hope it's not an explosion, more like a gentle experience.
Okay. Yes.
I don't think this will ever give you an explosion on anything, yeah?
Depends on how fun the party is. Anyways, I have to confess, we're having a jinx today. My computer is dead. Chris, are there any other questions that we want to cover with members of the audience before we let Dad go? And
I think we've pretty much covered it. I'm sure we're missing anything, but if anyone does have any questions that would love to get them to my father, please send them to contact us, and would be happy to to get them to him and certainly respond. So, but yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Dad, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have expert genius perspective of the wines. And
you are the geniuses. I'm just watching.
Next week, I understand you guys are heading back to the ranch to check in on the cows, and we're actually really excited to be able to make some great new announcements about the Brazos Food and Wine Society, and we'll be having Michelle Haskins, our ranch manager, on to talk about sustainable ranch practices and what we are doing over there with the animals. So
one extra thing, I like to share someday. We should bring in, Graham Wozencroft, and I wish some of the great creators in this project, unfortunately, I'm not longer with us, but we bring as many people as they were involved in the project, and because it was an interesting evolutionary process. Pursuing a principle, how you got through that pathway of evolution, and it is actually interesting, even if you're not interested in engineering or in architecture. Is actually a pretty interesting thing. So I think it deserves that we have a session on that.
I love that. It's official. We're publicly calling out Graham to come on board. We want him. It's official. You've all heard it. We're going to get Graham Wozencroft, the lead engineer of the winery, to come on and share with us the amazing story. It is actually. That design process was extraordinary. The building process was extraordinary. We got a lot of cool photos of that. Totally. I will make a call out to Graham, and we'll make that happen, Dad. We look forward to having both of you back on to tell us the stories of how this.
And we need to make a point to find the hand drawn drawings, because the real crazy ideas were on paper.
Napkins, as a matter of fact.
That's right. A few napkins, that's right.
Right.
Well, this has been wonderful. The highlight of our week. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at 4 o'clock Pacific time next Wednesday. In the meantime, we cheers to you.
Cheers.
And
all right.
we'll see you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.